This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Thousands of East Germans made their break to the West today, and thousands more are right behind them. It was another day that changed the face of communism forever. The government of Communist Hungary defied its communist ally, East Germany, threw open its borders, and allowed thousands of East German refugees to flee. Starting at midnight, they poured across the border into Austria, then straight through to West Germany, where all East Germans will be given automatic citizenship and freedom. Anthony Mason begins our report.
When this busload of East German refugees crossed into Austria early this evening, for many it was the first time they'd set foot in the West. These scenes of celebration and relief were repeated over and over again along the border today, as thousands of East Germans made their way west. They came any way they could, on foot, in their notoriously clunky East German cars, in imposing bus convoys. With Hungary's decision to throw open its borders, there was nothing more to stop them. The buses, organized by the West German government, were slow in coming to the Budapest camps this morning, but it was a short wait for the refugees who'd already spent more than 3 weeks here. The West German ambassador was there to see them off. Almost everyone was leaving except the East German consul. Dieter Graumann, whose job it was to convince his countrymen to come home, was today a lonely man. He locked up his portable consulate across from the camp one last time as his fellow East Germans went on their way. At the Hungarian border, their papers were given a routine check, and the refugees were waved into the West. What was once forbidden to East Germans today became a mere formality. But Hungarian officials have not said how long they plan to keep this border open. But many were grateful for just this opportunity. The Hungarian people are fantastic, he says. Almost all the refugees are heading for West Germany. Red Cross volunteers today helped point them the way. A tired few hundred made it to the tent cities the West Germans have prepared to accept the exodus. More than 10,000 are expected to reach here in the next few days in the greatest mass emigration of East Germans since the Berlin Wall went up 28 years ago. The small ceremonies to mark this historic day were emotional but brief. Then the refugees got back on the road. They've looked forward to this day for years and were determined now not to look back. Anthony Mason, CBS News, on the Hungarian border.
Hungary's opening of the refugee floodgates is a major turning point in its relations with its new friends in the West and its old allies in the East. The immediate result is that this country is now a magnet for refugees from communist dictatorships. More East Germans arrived at refugee camps here today. They were put on buses to join the exodus to West Germany. Hungary's decision to let the refugees go violates a treaty with East Germany. Faced with a choice between its Warsaw Pact obligations and better relations with the West, Hungary has chosen the West. This deepens the split within the Warsaw Pact and creates major problems for East Germany. The crisis comes at a time when the East German leadership is paralyzed. Party leader Erich Honecker is said to be critically ill with cancer and has been seen only twice in the past 2 months. The only reaction today from his hardline government was to accuse Hungary of organized smuggling of humans. But Western sources estimate that more than 1 million East Germans want to emigrate to the West. Hungarians overwhelmingly approved their government's action. There was applause, too, from West German relief agencies.
I never dreamt of such a humanitarian, generous solution to such a complicated problem.
For Hungary, the choice was also a matter of simple economics. It has twice as much trade with West Germany as with East Germany.
I think Hungary realizes that for the success of its economic reforms, it really needs West German financial, economic and political support.
Hungary's decision to tear down its section of the Iron Curtain 4 months ago was the beginning of a major shift in its military and foreign policy. Hungary is now discussing a military pact with its neutral neighbors, Austria and Yugoslavia. It wants to create a 60-mile deep buffer zone along the borders with those countries and is asking the Soviet Union to withdraw 2 armored battalions from the zone. The Soviets had already begun a partial pullout of their tanks last spring. Hungarian officials now say their aim is the eventual withdrawal of all Soviet forces and ultimately a neutral Hungary. Tom Fenton, CBS News, Budapest.
Mikhail Gorbachev yielded ground again today in another area, trying to settle a strike by one of the Soviet Union's own rebellious minorities. Workers went back to their jobs in the predominantly Muslim Republic of Azerbaijan, saying most of their political demands had been met. But as our Moscow correspondent Barry Peterson reports, similar movements are springing up all over the Soviet Union to challenge central authority.
They took to the streets in Baku to defy the Kremlin, the latest in a dangerous roll call of republics or nationalities who increasingly believe it is time to break free of communist rule. And today, their campaign won a major victory. The government forced to cut a deal, an end to a week of strikes, in exchange for letting political leaders form a popular front. In essence, a local political party likely to become a platform for those who oppose Moscow. Over the weekend, Mikhail Gorbachev pleaded for an end to these movements that threatened to break up the Soviet Union. But even as he spoke, there were meetings in the Baltics where the Popular Front movement began. And today, word of a Baltic common market to be formed in the next few years. Its goal, developing more trade with the West, vital to the Baltics' plan of someday standing on their own. And last night, demonstrations in the Ukraine, the second largest republic in the Soviet Union, to celebrate their new Popular Front formed over the weekend. They displayed the Ukrainian national flag amid some calls for total independence. These are the scenes, say observers, that prove growing defiance is becoming open rebellion. And all of Gorbachev's words can't seem to stop it. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
Populist Soviet politician Boris Yeltsin told CBS News today he figures Gorbachev must achieve much more economic progress within a year or possibly face a kind of revolution from below by rank-and-file working Russians. Yeltsin is in New York while on unofficial tour of the United States. I talked with him about the amazing events in Eastern Europe. When you see these pictures of the East Germans going through Hungary and going into Austria, one person, what goes through your mind and your heart?
Он хочет сказать тонущий корабль.
You mean to say, is this a sinking ship? Is that what you have in mind?
My question is whether that's what goes through your mind.
Нет,
Not really.
нет. Восточная Германия
East Germany
на плаву.
is sailing along nicely,
И потопление ей не грозит.
and there's no threat, there's no danger of it sinking.
Но разница в уровне жизни, конечно, в
But
Западной и
there is
Восточной Германии
definitely
есть.
a difference in standard of living between
That's
East
a
and
fact.
West Germany. That is a fact.
But you don't think this is going to become a big problem for Gorbachev and the Central Soviet leadership?
Нет.
No, I don't.
You continue to believe that the number one problem is economic reform.
И уровень жизни.
And the living standard, improving the living standard,
И социальная справедливость.
and social justice.
If things continue to go as they are going in the Soviet Union, does Mikhail Gorbachev survive as the central leader?
Вы задаете сложный вопрос.
This is a very difficult question to answer.
У него, конечно, были шансы поправить
He
положение,
has had opportunities to improve things
послушав.
and to correct the situation.
Я думаю, что
I think that
в пределах года есть еще время.
we still have about a year's time,
Вряд ли больше.
probably not more than that.
Начнется
What will happen is that
движение снизу.
there will be a movement from below, whereas perestroika is a sort of revolution from above.
Начнется сейчас уже.
We are now already seeing the beginnings of a movement from below. It has already started in this form of miners' strikes and other strikes.
Если не будет улучшения,
And if there is no improvement, in particular, of the living standard,
то это движение будет разрастаться.
this movement from below will spread,
И это уже будет революция.
and it will become a revolution from below.
Это, конечно, очень опасно.
This would be very dangerous, obviously.
Boris Yeltsin in a CBS News interview today. Still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, the first in a series on the corrosive effect of drugs in our country. Crack, crime, corruption, ruined lives, and one nation under siege. As we continue our across-the-board CBS News special coverage of crack and other drugs, one nation under siege, the results tonight of the latest CBS News New York Times poll. These results confirm not only the public perception of drugs as the #1 national problem, but local problem, close to home. 1/3 of the people we polled said drugs were now the most important problem in their own communities. More than 25% said they know places in their own neighborhoods where drugs are sold. And about half the people we polled said they personally know someone seriously affected by illegal narcotics. President Bush had a spokesman confirm various news reports that, yes, he did secretly authorize back in August an expanded role for U.S. soldiers sent to help control drugs in South America. Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia were specifically mentioned, but Mr. Bush denies this was any secret approval for a combat role. Still, he seemed to leave the door open for U.S. soldiers to work out in the field for training missions in those countries where they could come under attack. Now, besides questions about how much wider role U.S. soldiers are to be given, there are also questions about what kind of U.S. military equipment has been sent to Colombia. Has the right kind of equipment been sent? How helpful can it really be? CBS News correspondent Richard Threlkeld is on scene in Colombia looking into this.
In Medellin, Colombia's cocaine capital, a former mayor was assassinated today, presumably by gunmen from the drug cartels. And in Bogota, they were scheduled to deliver more of that $65 million in U.S. military hardware, designed to help Colombia put its $4 billion a year drug business out of business. Is it money well spent or money down the drain? Even some beleaguered Colombians are having trouble answering that. For one thing, Colombia's pervasive security forces must finally break off that cozy relationship they've had with the drug lords, the so-called traficantes. For 10 years now, they've teamed up with the right-wing death squads linked to the military in the brutal ongoing war here against guerrillas and just about anybody else who is left of center.
This has been a paramilitary death squad violence financed by the drug trade, and with the direct complicity of very high-placed officials in the armed forces.
The success of America's military investment here will also depend on whether, after 400 years of hardship, institutional corruption, and terrible violence, Colombia's finally prepared to become an honest and more just society. Money doesn't just talk here, it shouts.
Plata o plomo, the traficantes say, silver or lead, a bribe or a bullet. The cemeteries here are full of honest people who took the bullet, so it's not surprising that there are soldiers who will take a bribe to look the other way. The going rate here is $250 a month for a private, twice his salary, $5,000 for a captain, $15,000 a month for a general.
The worst problem is the infiltration and corruption of drug traffickers within the military institutions.
It may well turn out that even with all this U.S. help, Colombia will lose its war. If so, Washington will have wasted a lot of its money and a lot of its prestige down here in the middle of the Andes, only to discover that in the war against drugs, victory, like charity, begins at home. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, Bogota.
The accused narcotics cartel money man, extradited by Colombia last week to face trial in the USA, pleaded not guilty today. He is now held in Atlanta on charges of laundering more than $1 billion in dirty drug money. Eduardo Martinez Romero was ordered held without bail. What to do about this nation's aging commercial aircraft? Well, today the Federal Aviation Administration said it will order structural modifications to ensure the safety of 1,500 planes. They involve older McDonnell Douglas DC-8s, DC-9s, DC-10s, and MD-80s. Well, coming soon, though perhaps not to a grocery store near you, fresh fruit and vegetables free of cancer-causing pesticides. That was the gist of an announcement today from an environmental group and some retail store chains. It was immediately denounced by some larger retailers. Eric Ingberg is covering the issues in this food fight.
The long-running debate over the safety of pesticide-treated food abruptly turned a corner today.
Environmentalists who used to say government regulation was the answer shifted to a free enterprise approach, announcing they had won cooperative agreements from 4 retail food chains to stop selling pesticide-tainted food.
A past reliance on regulation per se is a broken reed. It ignores the essential genius of the American market, of America, which is marketplace pressures.
The agreements cover about 150 stores in New England, Arizona, and California, 1,000 in Canada, with sales totaling $8 billion annually. That's only a small percent of food retailers, but the activists claim more will sign up.
We expect that this is going to be the #1 issue on the agenda of the American supermarket industry, and we're proud that these folks have had the courage to go first.
The food chains, which already had their TV ads in the can trumpeting the policy, agreed to keep foods treated with poisonous pesticides off the shelf and to require growers to tell retailers which pesticides they use. The food industry's trade associations reacted angrily.
We are concerned about a campaign, a strategy which is a campaign to intimidate, extort, if you will, hold hostage public confidence in the safety of food.
Supermarkets cannot become the nation's food police.
The industry fears that as stores use their pesticide agreements as sales weapons against competitors, doubts about safety will multiply. Environmentalists are chortling that for once they've made Reagan-style free enterprise work for their side. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
New questions raised today about the quality of prescription generic drugs, that is, the basic drugs, and the quality of your Food and Drug Administration's regulation of the generic food industry during the 1980s. FDA inspectors now say they've found significant manufacturing and record-keeping problems in prescription generic drugs at 11 of 13 generic drug companies under investigation. It was the end of one chapter in one Wall Street scandal and corruption case today. The investment firm of Drexel Burnham Lambert pleaded guilty to 6 felonies and agreed to pay a record fine of more than $650 million. That's to settle criminal charges in the largest ever securities fraud case stemming from the Ivan Boesky insider trading scandal of 3 years ago. Our nation is immune from the drug menace. No question, though, that some of the worst of it is in our nation's inner cities, where drugs are fueling the decay and despair of whole neighborhoods, wrecking families, slicing across generations, creating a climate of mindless violence and robbing the innocent of hope, and in some cases, life itself. Correspondent Harold Dow has been out on the streets and tonight has the first of 2 reports about one such neighborhood, a painful illustration of what we're all up against. Drugs. One nation under siege.
This is the image Boston likes to project. A city
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, live from Miami, how to stop drugs from entering this country.
Also, more with Natalie Cole, and David Crosby joins us on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
And coming up.